Mark Spector, man. I mean, sometimes things get a little bit too out of control. You just gotta let everything else happen. Just let Steven take over the body, Mark. It's not that hard. Okay, this is the first time since seeing Moon Knight that we're talking about anything Mark Spector on the channel. Thus, I feel like it's appropriate to go out there and try to fit in as many Moon Knight jokes as possible. It's not that I didn't recognize Mark Spector and the alignment of the names here from before, it's just now that that series is popular and people know what it's about, the Mark Spector in the Marvel Universe is no longer as obscure as it had been before. Either way, let's talk about what Mark Spector wrote about when it comes to the Edmonton Oilers mailbag on his latest article on Sportsnet. What will the offseason bring to Edmonton? This article was published 2 days ago, and the link is going to be in the description if you want to go ahead and read it. Now, Mark Spector has a reputation amongst the Edmonton Oilers and their fan base that isn't really particularly great. Anytime there is a rumor or an idea or a trade proposal tossed around by Mark Spector, a lot of people are very quick to discredit that idea. And, I mean, it's more of a testament to the type of reporting that Spector has been doing over the past few years, but reputation aside, Mark Spector is still a prominent Sportsnet writer, thus he still has a platform, and thus people still go out there and read his articles. So, let's go over this idea that was tossed around that got a lot of people on both the Oilers side as well as the Anaheim Ducks side pretty pissed off, and that's probably why I'm making this video in the first place, because when you talk about ideas that piss off both fan bases, that is where you ultimately learn the most, I feel, and it's where the best kinds of discussions end up occurring. So, back to the article we go over here. Let's go over Spector and the recent mailbag. This is the entire idea that is brought up. It's a question from Ash on Twitter. Hey Spec, if you were the GM, ignoring cap space and money for a second, who would be your ideal goalie to get in free agency or a trade? If it's a trade, what would you give up? The article then goes over what Ken Holland had done in the past, Hasek, Cujo, Jacob Markstrom, Darcy Kemper, but they couldn't do it. Marc-Andre Fleury, we continue to hear, chooses not to play in Edmonton. John Gibson almost certainly has Edmonton on his no-trade list, and American players in coastal locations almost never opt for an Edmonton or Winnipeg. If Gibson is willing, however, we would bet that Ken Holland is all over that trade and willing to trade a top prospect, Jesse Puljujarvi, and this year's first in the deal. He then writes about how the two Edmonton primary targets are Ville Husso and Jack Campbell, but that's not really what I wanted to talk about here today. I wanted to talk about the Gibson-Puljujarvi thing. That was our preliminary overall point I wanted to get over, because there's another question written here from Matt. Given that Puljujarvi has the highest points per games played for all right-wingers in the NHL, the least amount of goals against per 60 minutes, and he helped all the centers he played with scored more and get scored on less, on top of being the only right wing with even goal differential in the playoffs, why does the media view him as the odd one out? Spector goes out there and writes that he's not sure if it's quote-unquote the media that views Puljujarvi as the odd man out, as much as the one player who could go to arbitration and earn a salary that far exceeds his level of production. Spector goes out there and writes about how he sees Puljujarvi as an analytics fail. That's not Puljujarvi's fault. All it means is those numbers could produce a player who is paid more than he is worth to a team, which makes this a crucial moment for Holland. At age 24, we are still protecting Puljujarvi wherever he's going to end up. He is not going to be there yet. And what about this? If Puljujarvi is ready to move on to a new environment, as he was 2 years ago, we've approached his agent Marcus Leto, who politely declined to speak. But if acceptance from his teammates was an issue 2 years ago for JP, will that have changed enough for him to be happy as an Oiler? And so, this entire idea of Puljujarvi being on the block, not being on the block, it's all about the money, no, it's all about the production, it's all about the advanced stats, whatever, it does not change the fact that we still have speculation going out there saying things like this. Hey, if John Gibson is willing to come to Edmonton, you know Ken Holland is going to go out there and try to trade a top prospect, Puljujarvi, and this first in that kind of trade. And this is sort of where the media, I feel like, has to have a little bit of a sense of responsibility, because these are mainstream articles, right? Like, these things get printed in the newspaper sometimes. These are mainstay pieces that go up on the website, and therefore, you know, everybody in Edmonton who is a hockey fanatic is going to go out there and read this piece. Even if they don't like Spector, they're going to go out there and see it. It's going to pop up on their Facebook and their Twitter, and they're going to scroll down and see the first thing saying, hey, if Gibson is available, here you go. JP, a first, and a prospect. This is why this ticked off the Edmonton Oilers fan base, because this seemed like a lot of speculation that doesn't really seem necessary to provide, mostly because he kind of contradicts the entire idea by earlier saying that Gibson might not even have Edmonton on his trade list, or it's likely that he doesn't have Edmonton on his trade list. Furthermore, even if he did, who's to say that Ken Holland would immediately think, okay, Puljujarvi, that's the guy. This is a player that has such a big spot in the mainstream when it comes to the Oilers and their vision, their imagery to the fans and everything, because Puljujarvi, as we have discussed in many videos in the past, he's a lovable guy, he's a bison out there on the ice, he has great advanced analytics, he has bad English, and he's just a cool, interesting dude to talk to. This is a player that a lot of Oilers fans like as a person, not just as a hockey player, but as a regular human being as well. There is a human element that comes into these conversations when you discuss, okay, trade, sign, whatever. And just based off of my perspective, looking at how Oilers fans always respond whenever these articles are made, and whenever I make videos about these types of articles, a lot of people go out there and try to defend this guy because they like him. And it's why articles like this that are purely speculation are so angering to Oilers fans, because you're calling the guy out, you're known for making speculation, etc., etc. But for a quick second, I wanted to go out there and actually entertain this idea. Let's say a top prospect is, I don't know, Luka Munzenberger. He's a guy the Oilers acquired in last year's draft in the trade-down scenario with the Minnesota Wild, wherein they lost Jesper Wallstedt. Let's throw in his name, just for the sake of making things interesting. Munzenberger, Puljujarvi, a first in this year's NHL Draft, which we go over to tankathon.com, is at the 29th overall position because they were in the conference finals. In exchange for John Gibson? I mean, John Gibson is a good goaltender, but as we've talked about in the previous Gibson video, there are questions to be held as to whether or not John Gibson's performance on Anaheim is getting worse because he plays for Anaheim or because he is getting worse himself. He's 28 years old. You could debate that the Ducks team that he's behind right now is a lot worse than the Ducks team he was behind in 2018, for example, when he was 24. It's been a really interesting discussion actually popping up about John Gibson from both Oilers and Leafs fans every time this guy's name is mentioned, because there is a statistical decline. He had a 9.26 in 2018, a 9.17 in 2019, a 9.04, and a 9.03, and a 9.04 afterwards in 2020, 21, and 22. So this player, for all intents and purposes, is getting worse. And the question is that his fault or is that the team's fault? He's signed on till 2027 at $6.4 million a year with a modified no-trade clause. And as we discussed in the previous video, it's tough to find players that have modified no-trade clauses with no team lists and all that actually have Canadian teams on their radar. We talked about this with the Evgeny Dadonov situation that, hey, Dadonov actually had Montreal as a team that he's able to be traded to. Why was that the case when most times players on American teams don't want to go to Canadian teams? We hypothesized that because Dadonov signed the contract in Ottawa, there might have been a willingness to go to any other Canadian team because he's already there in Canada, and he didn't want to go to any California teams like Anaheim, for example, because high tax rates in California, etc., etc. But either way, for John Gibson, Spec makes a good point. It's not rare to find American coastal players, and by American, I mean players that play in America, who don't want to go over to Canada and who don't have these teams on their no trades. In this article specifically, I just don't really see the point in bringing up the idea that says, okay, John Gibson probably doesn't want to go to Edmonton. But if he does, here you go, JP. Here's a first, and here's Luka Munzenberger, just to throw some names out there. It really started getting people talking about Puljujarvi on my feed, and people got so annoyed that this idea was even mentioned that I felt like I had to make a video about this here, just so I could try to gauge the field and hear what other Oilers fans had to say in my comment section. So, hypothetically, if John Gibson is on the market and he is willing to come to Edmonton, Oilers fans, what do you think about that type of return? The 29th overall pick, Jesse Puljujarvi, or at least the signing rights to this guy, as well as another prospect for that goaltender. Is that an overpayment? Do you still like Puljujarvi and the advanced analytics? Do you still think he's going to be better even though he's 24 and he's already developed in the way that he has up to this point? Do you think there's a future that says that Puljujarvi is going to be a lot better than what he is so far for Edmonton? If not, would you make this trade? If you're a Ducks fan, do you want to see this entire idea go down? Because I saw a lot of Ducks fans talking about the same article too, getting pretty pissed off about the return and saying that this isn't really something they would want. But that's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, right? Like, both teams' fan bases hated this idea, and that's why I think it's so interesting. Talk to me in the comments, let your thoughts. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.